Okay, on a medical thing, here we got a story. Today is 2/18/2014. Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease, controversy and treatment explained. Fibromyalgia is one of the most elusive diseases that affect the human body. Given its many vague symptoms, numbness, anxiety, insomnia, irritable bowel syndrome, depression, and more, it's very hard to diagnose, which explains why the cause of FMS is currently unknown. Like any idiopathic disease or medical condition, not fully understanding the cause and treatment can be the most devastating part. Some experts believe FMS is related to hormonal disturbances and chemical imbalances affecting the nervous system. Others link the condition to illness, trauma, or just plain stress. Still, other researchers blame genetics or claim there is no explanation at all. Indeed, even today, fibromyalgia is often labeled as a somatoform disorder, meaning it's all in the head. But anyone actually suffering from FMS will tell you this is not the. Let me scroll down. Wow. Not the. Well, where'd the rest of the story go? Not the case. Okay, sorry. That word was way over there by itself. Wow. I don't know if those pictures have to do with fibromyalgia, but apparently, let's see what it says here.
Is chronic Lyme disease real? Let's take a look at some of the facts here. According to CDC, the recommendations versus the clinical realities might be a little bit different. They're expecting, when a doctor's diagnosing chronic or Lyme disease itself, is that a patient has an erythema migrans rash. Let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. We're going to bring in a Medscape article. Here's what erythema migrans looks like. And it's essentially, you can see different variations of rashes that occur. However, in the data, clinically, we only see about 25 to 50% of the patients actually have this presentation of symptoms. So if this doesn't occur, a doctor can miss the diagnosis, and this is one of CDC's criteria. The other area that CDC is saying is that it has to be in a certain geographical region. About 99% of all reported cases come from, let's say, the New England states and so forth. So let's take a look at that as well, because I believe this is really important so that patients get a better idea of what's going on clinically and why there might be some misdiagnosis. Look at the map here. You can see this is the reported states according to CDC, but it really is not that accurate because Lyme disease is all throughout the United States and Canada and really all around the world. So if a doctor uses this criteria, then they could misdiagnose or miss the fact that the patient has chronic Lyme disease altogether. The other criteria was testing. And first, it's called a two-tier form of testing. You start with the ELISA, move to the Western blot. The problem with that is, though, that some patients might come back seronegative even though they have the disease. They might actually not come back positive because they've been tested and the disease is not showing up. Let's take a closer look at that. So first they start with the ELISA and then with the Western blot test and the IgG and so forth. And so what happens is when this test is done, if a patient has weakened immunity or is on medication, it'll come back negative, even if the patient is positive. And so here's another problem we have with CDC testing. And so it's important that we understand that this is why there might be many undiagnosed cases across the country, leaving patients with the wrong diagnosis. The physician is treating fibromyalgia, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, other autoimmune diseases, which may mimic Lyme disease, its co-infections, and its immune compromised state. And what happens is if you don't get the right diagnosis, you're going to be on painkillers, antidepressants, anti-inflammatories, and steroids. So it's important that we educate people. On the other hand, if the patient is tested for various infections, tick-borne, viral, parasitic, and these come back positive, along with a weakened immune system, possible chemical and heavy metal toxicities, what we call the full Lyme disease complex of testing, then we can treat those factors and help improve the patient's health. Here's another really nice little diagram, because we can see that the symptoms for fibromyalgia syndrome and Lyme disease are almost identical. In fact, Lyme disease has many more symptoms than this, but they're identical in the way that they'll present. In fact, Lyme disease can mimic 350 diseases. So really, when we look at fibromyalgia and other autoimmune diseases, what we think of these diseases is we don't know what causes them. They're called idiopathic. However, when we do further testing, we can find the heavy metal, chemical toxins, infections, and viral bacterial co-infections that are impacting the patient. So the bottom line is we have to ask the right questions, get them answered correctly by doing the right testing, correctly follow up with the patient, monitor them, and we can really help them improve from chronic disease. So this is a real thing. Does chronic Lyme disease really exist? And the answer is, if we test thoroughly and we look for all the infections and we see it more as a complex of infections, and maybe not just one infection, Borrelia, by itself, as CDC points out. Instead, we see it as the umbrella of symptoms, the umbrella of infections, chemical, heavy metal toxins. We're able to then possibly treat the patient and improve their outcome. So education is really the key. Patients and doctors working together to help patients get well. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We're here to help you, and we've been doing that for patients as a group for well over a decade. Thank you.
Therefore, it's important to note that our clinical experience with numerous patients points to Lyme disease, or what other LLMDs have dubbed chronic Lyme disease complex, as having something to do with fibromyalgia's origins for some patients. To make this easier to understand, let's define chronic Lyme disease complex, CLDC, based on our 10 years of clinical experience and our Lyme literate medical doctors' experience with treating chronic infections, fibromyalgia, and autoimmune diseases. Shea Medical defines CLDC as involving one or more factors: Lyme disease, its co-infections, the reactivation of dormant infections such as viruses, and an immune compromised state that can be further complicated by heavy metal and chemical toxicities. How this differs from the CDC's definition is they are treating Lyme disease in a vacuum as one infection and not clinically correlating it to the complete complex diagnosis that is typically seen in patients. A deeper look at fibromyalgia's link to Lyme disease complex. Fibromyalgiasymptoms.org has this to say about Lyme disease complex. It is thought that between 15 and 50% of those patients diagnosed with Lyme disease actually have fibromyalgia. It is important that you be tested for Lyme disease using a variety of different diagnostic tests in order to rule out this disease. Not only that, Lyme disease will produce a vast range of symptoms, but not all patients suffering from Borrelia burgdorferi sensu stricto, the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, will produce all of the symptoms, many of which are not even specific to Lyme disease. First, let's explain what Lyme disease is. Like syphilis, Lyme is a spirochete bacterium that is spread through blood-sucking insects, especially deer ticks. However, the symptoms can relate to a vast variety of other symptoms, including swollen lymph nodes, fever and chills, headache and stiff neck, muscles and joint pain, and the most common symptom, lack of energy. After a month, if Lyme disease is not treated, these symptoms will soon include skin rashes, pain, weakness, or numbness in the arms and legs, paralysis of facial nerves, recurring headaches or fainting, poor concentration and memory recall, pink eye, conjunctivitis, and heart palpitations. Late persistent infections include increased swelling in the knees, numbness and tinglings in the hands, severe fatigue, chronic Lyme arthritis, which can cause recurrent swelling, redness, and fluid buildup in the joints, and even neurological changes affecting memory, mood, sleep, and even difficulty speaking. To further complicate matters, many tests for Lyme disease can come back false positive or false negative. As you can see, early stage of Lyme disease can be very difficult to diagnose, even with a blood test. In addition to physical examination, results most doctors will rely on environmental factors such as exposure to ticks, carrying the disease, and medical history. But let's go back to fibromyalgia. Some of these symptoms certainly overlap, especially muscle pain and fatigue. But is there a link? Let's get scientific for a moment. Consider the connection between chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS, and FMS through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Don't let that long string of words confuse you. The HPA is merely a communication network, or direct influences and feedback interactions between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and the adrenal gland. Think of it as an internet connection in your brain. In many cases, abnormal levels of certain chemicals that are regulated by the HPX axis have proposed as a potential cause of CFS. In Lyme disease, patients can contract the infection and its co-infections at any point in their lifetime, but the symptoms may not raise their head until the patient is weakened, usually by a traumatic experience such as a major injury, giving birth, receiving a vaccine, or even extreme emotional trauma such as divorce or death. Such trauma will undoubtedly affect the HPA axis. However, how much will vary depending on the patient. Let's bring it all back. If chronic Lyme disease can affect the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and the HPA axis can lead to chronic fatigue syndrome, which is related to fibromyalgia, then it seems there is a link from Lyme disease to FMS. Lyme disease treatment is relatively simple and can be done with antibiotics if diagnosed and treated in early stages, which is rarely the case. Unfortunately, for fibromyalgia, there is no universally accepted cure. Treatment generally consists of symptoms management, i.e., exercise therapy to relieve muscle spasms. If you have concerns about chronic Lyme disease complex or fibromyalgia, contact us. Our team is equipped to help answer questions you may have. Carol Roberts. This was from the Shea Medical Place, wherever that is. I have no idea. But let me click on the Contact Us so you'll know how to get a hold of them. Shea Medical has developed the finest train, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's their phone number, folks. 480-657-7000. Their email address, sam@sheamedical.com. Address, 12002 E. Shea Boulevard, number 5, Scottsdale, Arizona, 85259. Okay, and I will put the link below the video. Carol Roberts.